In this life, there are things that just go together, things that are synonymous with each other. Couple of examples just to start off here. We're thinking peanut butter jelly, socks, bacon and eggs, Tom and Jerry, bat and ball, Bonnie and Clyde, and then one that pertains to this channel, my fandom, and this video in general, and that's the Jets and poor drafting and poor scouting. It's just two things that are synonymous with each other, things that, as Jet fans we've dealt with for so long, but one that goes against the grain was the 2022 draft class for the New York Jets. Kind of like a crown, definitely the crown jewel of Joe Douglas's tenure as the New York Jets. And really throughout the Jets' history, you can't find a first four that were drafted better than this draft. Now, I know a lot of people might say that those guys are pretty much can't miss, but yeah, you still got to make the pick, and those guys still have to play. And they certainly have worked out swimmingly for the Jets up until this point. But let's take a deeper look at this class. This is something that I did a couple days ago with the 2024 Jets class. That was a report card of those rookies' rookie seasons. That's not a definitive grade. One commenter did say to me that you can't truly grade a draft pick until they play 3 years in the NFL at the very least. And that got me thinking, hey, well, the 2022 Jets draft class is officially 3 years old now, or 3 seasons old. So let's go back and take a look at that. So we're going to start with guys that weren't necessarily drafted, that were undrafted free agents, but me being a draft connoisseur and a draft-obsessed human being, I do kind of consider the undrafted free agent draft class in with the actual draft class itself, because you're still bringing in players that are rookies. So we're going to take a look at Urban Charles first. Someone that went to Penn State, got injured, went to Indiana, but Indiana from Pennsylvania. To be honest with you, as a college football fanatic myself, I kind of had to look up this college. I had no idea. I was like, oh, wow, he went to Indiana. No, he went to IUP. And I never even knew that college existed. So that was obviously after Penn State, but an undrafted free agent in 2022. So he's a wide receiver. But, us Jet fans know that Urban Charles is a special teams ace at this point. 25 career games, 450 special teams snaps, 14 total tackles. The majority of those last two statistics came this past season, where there were times, if you go back to the Tennessee Titans game in week 2, for a long stretch of that game, Urban Charles was the best player that the Jets had on the field. He is, first off, I don't know why they don't give him more snaps at wide receiver. He truly must be terrible off the line of scrimmage, because the guy is 6'4", 220 pounds. I don't know why he doesn't get more looks, especially once the season was gone this year. I don't know why he didn't get more looks at the wide receiver position. But be that as it may, I think Urban Charles didn't play in 2022. He was on the practice squad the entire season. Last year, he played a bit. And then this year, he was the main special teams gunner. And he was fantastic. Someone that I thought should have gotten, a few Pro Bowl votes, a few All-Pro votes as well. Someone that I think really, really stood out. And I'm excited to see how he will develop past this. So I gave him an A. I think really special teams aces are really underrated, undervalued players on the roster. And if you could have one and lock him up for a really, really long time, like, hello, look at Matthew Slater, people. That guy could be a Hall of Famer just being a gunner, basically. So Urban Charles is someone that I think has been a massive success on the Jets roster so far. Next, we're going to look at Zonovan Bam Knight. So obviously, as you know now, I actually do believe at the time of recording, I don't know if Bam Knight is still on the Jets practice squad, but I know that towards the end of the 2024 season, they did bring him back onto the practice squad, but he was on the Jets in 2022. He filled in for the injured Breece Hall and filled in quite well, especially for an undrafted free agent. 85 carries, 300 rushing yards, a TD, and 100 receiving yards on 13 receptions. I gave him a B purely because really, if you average it out, 98 total touches and only about 4 yards per touch isn't too spectacular. But considering that he had massive shoes to fill from the spark that Breece Hall brought his rookie season, and then, of course, that devastating injury, I thought Bam Knight stepped in perfectly. He did go to the Detroit Lions in 2023. Didn't play too much for them. Was basically out of the NFL, not out of the NFL, but didn't play an NFL game in 2024, but did find himself on the practice squad at the end of the 2024 season. So I think as a fill-in, someone that kind of really he was a little bit of a cult hero towards the end of that 2022 season for New York Jets fans. He was someone that kind of put a smile on our face after, we kind of bombed out that season. Towards the end, he was someone that I think actually performed pretty well. One of the better offensive performers towards the end of the year, but I did give him a B. I thought maybe he could have turned his 98 touches into something more than 400 total yards, but he did show flashes of having some real big playability. Then we're going to move on to Tony Adams, someone that, I got killed in my Fixing the New York Jets this offseason video because I said how much I really sang Tony Adams' praises. And I do like Tony Adams quite a bit. This year, in terms of statistics, considering that he played 76% of the defensive snaps for the Jets this year, his numbers were down cataclysmically, I would like to say. Also, in the run support area, he wasn't nearly as good as he was last year. Last year was easily his best year. He played, I think it was like 56% of the snaps, had 3 interceptions, was a huge part of the Jets beating the undefeated Eagles at that time and essentially ruining their season. But I think Tony Adams is really good. I would love to see, he's a restricted free agent coming up this offseason. I would love to see the Jets bring him back as someone that's, I don't know how good Tony Adams is as an every down or a majority down safety. I think his coverage skills are pretty good. Tackling is pretty good, but his run support leaves a lot to be desired. And we saw how much the Jets got absolutely killed against the run this past year. I don't think Tony Adams is someone that you could have in there every single snap. I would love to see them bring him back on, 2, 3, 4-year deal as someone that could be a rotational safety. I love him. 41 games, 27 starts. Majority of those starts came this year. 183 total tackles, 10 tackles for a loss, 11 pass deflections, 4 interceptions for an undrafted free agent out of Illinois who has produced quite a bit of secondary talent in the NFL in recent years. You think right away Devin Witherspoon, Kirby Joseph, Quan Martin as well. A couple other guys that I'm missing off the top of my head, but really have produced some. Brett Bielema has produced some serious talent at that Fighting Illini program. But I think Tony Adams is a B-. I think this past year's performance really brought his grade down. If I was doing this video after last year, it would probably be an A, just because what do you truly expect from an undrafted free agent? And the Jets and Joe Douglas himself have actually found some really talented undrafted free agents. The Jets are pretty synonymous over the years with being bad drafters, but finding some really talented undrafted free agents. Tony Adams is one included. I hope maybe in a more reserve role next year, he kind of has a bounce back season. I would love to see him back in green, white, and black, I guess, if the Jets run with that again, but green and white mostly. B- for me. Now we're going to get into the actual draft class itself, and we're going to start. Now, mind you, the Jets had more of a bevy of picks, but they did trade up back into the first round to select Jermaine Johnson. So they did give up quite a few of their picks that at this year later on in the draft. But they had 7 picks inside the top 117. So they really had an opportunity to do a lot of damage. And this, I don't know if you could see what I'm doing here, but this is a terrifying face. Micheal Clemons is a terrifying human being. He's just, I don't want to call him weird. I don't think that he's weird. I think he's eccentric. I think he's his own guy. I loved him from the beginning because when they interviewed him and said and asked him, well, what did you do for, when you heard your name get called? He was like, I was in a room by myself watching the draft. I mean, that is some psychotic shit that you would love to hear from someone that you just drafted. I thought he was going to be like a future All-Pro the way that he said that. Look at that septum piercing, those arms, terrifying human being. Now, my grade is a D+ for Micheal Clemons. Purely, just there's so many times throughout the course of a game when you're watching the Jets where you're like, my goodness gracious, what is he doing on the field? Those like scrum tackle piles, he's jumping on top of them. He's getting roughing the passer calls against him. He's just so undisciplined. I would love him as a rotational defensive lineman if he was just more disciplined. This is something that has been, kind of like a calling card for the Jets defense the last few years where they've been good. Well, this past year they were abysmal, but the last few years they've been good. They're just so undisciplined and they get a killer penalty when it matters the most. And Micheal Clemons was kind of at the heart of that a lot of the time. 49 total games, 18 starts, 97 total tackles, 10 tackles for a loss, 7.5 sacks, 15 quarterback hits, 2 forced fumbles. Decent numbers for someone that's like a rotational defensive lineman. Personally, myself, I wouldn't want to see him return this year. That's just me. I don't know what you guys feel, but I actually spelled his name right this time. I didn't realize that he spells Michael a different way, and then Clemons doesn't have an A in it, where I thought it would, but why would Clemons have an A? I don't know. I'm bad at spelling. I'm bad at pronouncing things. Don't shoot me. Leave me alone. But yeah, I guess these are fine for a defensive line rotational player. But he started a lot of games. He started a lot of games for the Jets this past year as well, and just someone that's really not impactful as a full-time starter. Like I said, someone in an 8 or 9 man rotation would be fine, but starting 18 games over the course of 3 years and having those paltry numbers, I think it's time to cut ties. I think 4th round, I'm looking for a rotational defensive player, to be quite honest with you. After the first 3.5 rounds, maybe 4 to some degree, I start looking at players as more rotational guys or high upside guys that might have had some character concerns or injury concerns or couldn't really put it together in college. But really those first 3 rounds, I'm looking for impact starters from day one. I had high hopes for Micheal Clemons, but I think it's clear 3 years into his career that is not him. He is not a high impact starter. He's a fine rotational guy, I guess. Now we're going to Max Micheal, who has probably the most terrifying picture I have ever seen. I mean, if you look all the way, so cut this part off for a second. This picture is fine up until you get where his head is, and it just looks like his head was superimposed onto his body. I don't know what's happening here, but this photo, before I blushed out the background, I didn't realize how terrifying this image is of his face. But I'm not saying he's ugly. It just doesn't look right. You ever heard of Uncanny Valley? That's what I feel like I'm looking at with this picture. There's just something slightly wrong with this photo of his face, and I can't really put my finger on it, but it's freaking me out. So I'm going to get past this slide pretty much as fast as humanly possible. I mean, if you guys watch Jet games, this guy is terrible. I mean, Max Micheal is someone that I thought maybe after his first year, he honestly wasn't too bad. He was kind of promising. He had about, I think, 336 snaps his rookie season, only gave up 3 sacks and actually looked pretty decent in pass blocking. So it was something to build off of. But last year, he was terrible. This year, in limited time, he actually wasn't that bad as a pass blocker, but as a run blocker, he was absolutely abysmal. In the last game of the season, I believe he gave up 2 sacks. He looked terrible, but 11 sacks given up, 53 pressures given up in 30 games, and only 14 starts. You got to remember, a lot of the games that he's played in, he's only been in for a few snaps. So the majority of these numbers I'm showing you here are from those 14 starts, and that's pretty alarming. So I don't like to give any player an F. I just think that giving him an F is completely giving up on them and thinking that they have absolutely no redeemable qualities and no chance of developing. 3 years into a career when these guys are 24, 25, well, Micheal Clemons' case, he's 27 already. I'm giving a D as like, yeah, I'm kind of sort of giving up on them, but I still have a little bit of hope. But Max Micheal, not a great pick here at number 111. And then speaking of another bad pick, yeah, this draft after the first 4, I mean, it was pretty not great, to put it lightly. Jeremy Ruckert, I had high hopes for him. Being from the 5 boroughs myself, hearing someone getting drafted from Long Island was pretty cool. And that was really as good as it got. I mean, these numbers, granted, he's never been given a full-time role. Has he ever deserved a full-time role? Do not think so. Jeremy Ruckert, I think, is pretty terrible all around. Unfortunately, he's the only Jet tight end that's under contract this year. That is something that I would love to see change. I would love to see Kenny Yeboah come back. I'd love to see Tyler Conklin come back. Jeremy Ruckert is someone that I could totally do without, especially since if you cut him, you can save $1.4 million. And I could think of a lot of different ways that the Jets could spend $1.4 million and would be probably better than Jeremy Ruckert. But yeah, I mean, he showed some flashes early on in his career as a solid blocking tight end. But really, he was never going to offer you anything crazy in the receiving department. You know, and that's what you get here. 3 years into his career, 35 catches as a 3rd-round pick. You know, what really more is there to say? I think Jeremy Ruckert is someone that could, honestly, if I had to choose my backup tight end between Kenny Yeboah and Jeremy Ruckert, I think I'd easily choose Kenny Yeboah 10 times out of 10. Ruckert is probably someone that's best fit on a different team going into the new regime that the Jets are going to have. Now we get into the good picks. Here we go. Now, right away, you're going to look down at the bottom of the screen and see a B+ grade for Breece Hall. And I know some of you are Breece sexuals. Some of you aren't. That's okay. I think B+ is a more than fair grade for Breece Hall because, you know, in his rookie year, up until that Denver game, you know, he was looking like someone that was going to be a top 3 running back in the NFL. I mean, he was a sensational part of the Jets offense early on in his career. Then, of course, unfortunately, the torn ACL, you know, just an absolute killer. But be that as it may, in really 2.5 total seasons, 3,625 total scrimmage yards, 22 total touchdowns, 9 fumbles. Now, that's a little misleading. 6 of them came this past year, which just was an all-around down year for Breece Hall. He did have 1,359 total yards this year, but only 876 of them being rushing yards. He didn't get nearly as many attempts. He's like the only starting running back in the NFL that didn't get 20 carries in a single game. So, I don't know, weird year for Breece. I'm hoping that I think what the Jets were hoping was drafting Isaiah Davis, drafting Braylon Allen was not only an insurance policy, but was to take some of the pressure off of Breece Hall. But I think in not using him as much, I think they kind of wasted him, because last year when he came back from that devastating torn ACL, he was 4th in the NFL in scrimmage yards in 16 games. He was great all around. He didn't have a 1,000-yard season, but I believe he had 994 rushing yards, 8 rushing touchdowns, like 700 receiving yards, 600, 700 receiving yards, something around that. He was really great last year for the Jets. He was easily, besides for Garrett Wilson, their best offensive player last year. And at times, he was really the only offense. Think of Week 18 against the Patriots last year. He was really the only offense that they had. But yeah, I think due to the injury and the fact that Breece was drafted quite high for a running back, 36th overall is the 4th pick in the second round. At the time, I was doing draft content, and my eyes did kind of widen from this draft pick. I was like, wow, it's great. He's a great player. I don't really know how good the value is. Breece Hall has turned into a very, very fine running back. What worries me, though, is the lack of explosiveness we saw this season. There were numerous times where Breece Hall, maybe his rookie year or even last year, was able to break free for a long touchdown, and he just didn't have the juice this year. Quite honestly, I think next year is the last year of Breece Hall in a Jet uniform, unless barring some kind of insane season where he's healthy the entire year and he balls out from beginning to end. But granted, he should have gotten more touches, but I don't know. There was just something about Breece Hall this year that just didn't look right. And, once running backs kind of start going downhill, there's really no turning back for them. It's tough to turn back the clock. Not everyone can be Derrick Henry, where, you're rushing for 1,900 yards in your age 31 season. Not everyone can be like that. And I don't know, Breece Hall has had some trouble with his knee soreness that lingered around for most of the season, coming off of that devastating injury. Someone that I think if the Jets do explore a trade for him this offseason, I do think they can get a pretty lofty return back from him. I'm thinking a day 2 pick and a day 3 pick they can get back for him, just banking off of the potential that he could be one of those guys that turns into a top 3 scrimmage yard guy next year. But I don't know, man. There's just something about him. But the pick, I don't mind. I think he's been a great player for the Jets. B+ is my grade for that one. So now we're going to Jermaine Johnson. Jermaine, quite honestly, is probably my favorite Jet. He's just someone that truly looks like he bleeds green and white. Someone that if you follow him on Twitter after his devastating Achilles injury this past year, where every Jet fan and really every NFL fan had such high hopes for him this year, after last year being basically the Jets' best defensive lineman, man, there were some lofty expectations for him, but he had a sensational year last year. It looked like he was on pace to really be good this year. Devastating injury. Hopefully he comes back strong in his age 26 season. 88 total tackles, 15 tackles for a loss, 10 sacks, 21 quarterback hits, 7 pass deflections, an interception that turned into a pick 6, forced fumble recovery, and a Pro Bowl nod last year. I think he's been great. Even though his numbers were kind of skewed his rookie season, where he only had 2.5 sacks his rookie season, you have to realize he played more of a rotational role his rookie year. He didn't really see the field that much. Think of Will McDonald, but last year, where everyone was clowning, myself included, the Will McDonald pick, because I think he saw like 180 snaps the whole season. Jermaine Johnson didn't see 180 snaps. He saw more in the range of about 250, I would say, but he still didn't really play that much. Last year in a full-time role, he was sensational all around. I think he's a great player, and I think he's going to come back stronger than ever from that injury. I would give him an easy A-. The minus being the injury. We don't know what he's going to turn into when he comes back, but I think 3 years into his career, I think Jermaine Johnson could be potentially one of the premier pass rushers in the NFL if he could just stay healthy. He was a menace. 7.5 sacks last year kind of really doesn't do it justice. I know sacks isn't the whole story. I couldn't find pressures. I couldn't find hurries, to be quite honest with you. I would have loved to, but A lot of quarterback hits. He's very active at the line of scrimmage too. I think he's a fabulous player. Whatever defensive scheme the next defensive coordinator comes in with, I think he will be more than fine. And he's a great all-around player, and I'm excited to see him healthy again. Now we go with Garrett Wilson. And I mean, come on, guys. The writing is on the wall with these last two picks. You know exactly what grade both of these guys are going to get. Garrett Wilson, A+ easily. I believe he's the only Jet in history to start his career with 3 1,000-yard seasons. Now, if you look at the quarterback turmoil that he's had in his career up until this point, that is way more impressive than you think about. This year, with Aaron Rodgers playing every single game, he had 1,104 yards, kind of towards the end of the season where Aaron Rodgers was kind of force-feeding Davante Adams targets. A little bit of a disappointing end to the season for Garrett Wilson, but man, he had some season. 101 catches, 1,104 yards, 7 receiving touchdowns. He's awesome. I mean, if there was one thing I could change about Garrett Wilson, it's the fact that sometimes when he's trying to juke out a defender, he runs backwards or he jukes backwards. That's literally the only thing I would change about him. And admittedly, going into this season, I wasn't as high on Garrett Wilson as a lot of other people were. I thought Garrett Wilson was a perfect number 2 wide receiver that didn't really have a chance to be that alpha number 1, or didn't have the body type, or didn't really have the overall power and strength that it possesses, the downfield ability to be that number 1 overall guy. And man, before they got Davante Adams, he really proved us wrong. He was sensational for the Jets. And this is your guy going forward, to be honest with you. I have no doubt in my mind that Garrett Wilson, as long as he stays happy and he wants to stay on the New York Jets, there's no doubt in my mind that this guy is an undoubted cornerstone for the next, hopefully, until his career is over. He's a fantastic receiver. I think he's only going to get better. Just to go over his stats, 279 catches in 3 years, 3,249 yards, 3 1,000-yard seasons. And of course, he was the 2022 Offensive Rookie of the Year. Now, mind you, somehow he hasn't made a Pro Bowl or All-Pro team up until this point. So that's interesting to me, considering he was the Offensive Rookie of the Year. How do you not make at least a Pro Bowl? But we all know that all that voting is skewed. And now the piece de resistance is Sauce Gardner, of course. Now, Sauce Gardner, by his standards, had a down year this year. But if you look at his numbers based against every other cornerback in the NFL, he still had a sensational year. Now, I know, by the way, this picture of Sauce Gardner is very grainy. I apologize. Don't know why it looks like that, but it didn't look like that when I made the slideshow. Sorry about that. But, Sauce Gardner, he gets away with a lot of holds. He's very grabby, be that as it may. I think he's still a fantastic cover corner. Really proved his worth at times this year. In a down year for every single player on the New York Jets defense, I think Sauce Gardner still had a pretty decent year. 181 total tackles, 6 for a loss. That's where I would like to say where he really disappointed me this year is his tackling. I believe, at least from what I've watched and what I've seen throughout Sauce's first 2 seasons in the NFL, he was a very solid tackling cornerback. Someone that, for his size, I mean, he is 6'3", but he's pretty lanky. Doesn't look like he has too much strength in those arms. Was a very sound tackler. And this year, it just didn't see it. I don't know what happened with him. A ton of tackles broken. He was statistically like the 5th worst tackling cover corner in the NFL last year. He was really, really bad. And that's not even at the line of scrimmage or behind the line of scrimmage. That's just in coverage in general. So everyone's entitled to a down year or a semi-down year. I still think he had a good year compared to every other corner, just not a Sauce Gardner year. But 40 pass deflections, 21 of those came in his rookie season, which was sensational. This year, I believe he had 11 this year. He did have an interception towards the end of the season as well. 3 interceptions in total. 2-time first-team All-Pro, 2-time Pro Bowler, and of course, the 2022 Defensive Rookie of the Year. Kind of like what I said with Garrett Wilson. Sauce Gardner is the same thing. As long as you can keep him happy and you can keep him under contract, this is a cornerstone for, at least the next 5 to 8 years of your franchise, hopefully even more. He is a fantastic player when he's playing at his best, and there's no doubt in my mind that he will get back to being one of the best corners in the NFL when he's healthy next year. Now we're going to take a look at the overall class grade. I don't know why that's cut off. I'm sorry. I still can't figure out this presentation mode, to be honest with you. Anyway, you have to give it an A overall, to be quite honest with you. I mean, the last 4 picks of the draft, or the last 3 picks, of the draft are pretty rough. Jeremy Ruckert, Max Mitchell, and Micheal Clemons, but you can make the argument that all 4 of the first picks are all A's. I'm just a little bit of a tougher grader on the running backs, but Breece Hall is fantastic when fully healthy. Jermaine Johnson, the same thing, and obviously Sauce Gardner and Garrett Wilson are cornerstone pieces. And then you got a couple really great undrafted free agents in Irvin Charles, Tony Adams. Bam Knight doesn't really play on the Jets anymore, but you get what I'm saying. I think overall, you got significant impact players. You got cornerstone pieces from your first 2 picks. You have a sensational edge rusher from your 3rd and a potential franchise running back when healthy with your 4th pick. And then you got a couple really good playmakers from your undrafted free agent class. Overall, I think this is easily Joe Douglas's best overall moves that he made as the Jets general manager. Easily his best draft class. And yeah, I would go as far as to say, just off the top of my head, this is rivaling probably one of the best draft classes in Jets history, maybe even easily the best. At least the first 4 picks have to argue the best draft class in Jets history. But there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. There is my grades for the 2022 Jets draft class. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. Thank you guys so much for watching today. Please leave a like. Please subscribe if you are a Jet fan. And I will see you in the next one.